Hi, on Saturday night I finally got round to watching Michaelangelo Antonioni's The Passenger, a film he released in 1975 starring Jack Nicholson and Maria Schneider. Um, Antonioni is perhaps best known now for Blow Up, which I think was his debut English language film in 1966, and The Passenger forms the final part of a trilogy with Zabriskie Point as the central pillar, looking at ideas of alienation in the modern world. It's the story of David Locke, an American television journalist working in the UK, who's on assignment in the Sahara making a documentary about local tribespeople. However, he's somehow dissatisfied with his life and wants to see some kind of escape, particularly when his documentary seems to be going nowhere. He's befriended an Englishman in the fly-blown motel in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the desert, a man named Robertson, to whom he bears a passing resemblance. And then Robertson suddenly dies, having previously mentioned he has a heart complaint. Locke sees his opportunity and switches identities with Robertson, reporting to the front desk that Locke is dead and that he, Robertson, will be travelling on. So he then embarks on Robertson's life, while the people back home try to investigate what happened to Locke, how he came to die, and who this mysterious man Robertson is, who was a witness to his death. Locke himself, under the guise of Robertson, gets involved with gun runners and winds up travelling all over Europe, trying to escape from his past life and from Robertson's own legacy and start a new life of his own. The film is very documentary style in its presentation. Notably, there's virtually no music. There is, I think, at the end credits, but it's almost as though it's playing within the scene. Um, and it's often sort of shockingly abrupt in its style. The first 20 minutes of the film play out in Chad, in northwestern Africa, in the sub-Saharan region. And then there is a neck-breaking cut, and we're suddenly at the Brunswick Centre in central London, um, where we are introduced to the unnamed character played by Maria Schneider, a student who falls in with Locke and winds up travelling with him and becoming his lover. He takes her into his confidence about the nature of his true identity and what he's been doing, whilst Locke's wife has also taken a lover at her home in London. It's a story of alienation, of trying to escape from an unsatisfactory life into another life, but paying no heed for the consequences. He's chased all over the continent by people who want to find out who he really is and what's really happening, particularly the gun runners with whom Robertson was involved as some kind of broker or middleman, and whom Locke is now involved, completely unable to produce any kind of goods. But I think that although the film has lots of interesting ideas about identity, alienation, escape from the world that you found so disappointing, um, the alienating style of presentation, I think, works against it. It's a story about alienation made in a way that repels the audience. I think more could have been done, perhaps, to draw you in, to make it a little more Hitchcockian rather than so overtly art house. Um, that would perhaps undermine what people admire most about the movie. But I feel that the themes could be explored in something a little more palatable. Nicholson is very good. It's part of his early phase in his career when he was a lot more subdued, and it's a much quieter, more contained performance than you might normally see from him. And he was very proud of the finished film, to the extent that he actually bought the rights to it and kept it out of circulation for a long time until he was confident that a re-release could do it justice. Um, there are some strong supporting performances, mostly from Maria Schneider, who has an interesting character who herself is running away from something, the nature of which we never understand. Um, the film is notable for its uh, highly creative camera work. There is a scene near the start where Locke is listening to a recording he made of himself and Robertson having a conversation several days earlier. And as he sits listening to the recording, the camera slowly pans across the room to a window where we see a balcony where Robertson is standing, as though in a flashback. And he is then joined by Locke, with Nicholson having somehow gone around the back of the camera, toweled himself off because he's soaking wet with sweat, and changed costumes in the less than a minute that the camera isn't on him. The film's climax as well is again back in a hotel in the desert in the middle of nowhere, this time in Spain, with Locke having apparently reached the end of his tether, hiding in a motel. The camera very slowly pushes through the hotel window, through the bars somehow, and out into the square outside, having seen a car full of angry-looking people arriving, going into the hotel, and then at some point a distant gunshot. The camera continues to hover and eventually swing round as the police arrive, accompanied by Locke's wife. And the girl who go into the room, um, Locke's wife is asked to identify the body, but she says that she never really knew him. And although that gives away the end of the movie, this movie came out in 1975. Although that gives away the end of the movie, I don't think it spoils it. It's an interesting film. It's directed in an interesting way. Antonioni has a very unusual eye for capturing passing detail, and it has a very strong performance from as I say, from Nicholson and from Schneider. But just because of the way it's presented, because of the way the thesis interconnects with the style of the film, it doesn't quite work the way I feel it should. It might be sacrilege, but perhaps a more mainstream remake might benefit the story if it was in service of its themes. But it certainly is interesting, and as a result, I would say that if it sounds interesting to you, then it's probably worth your while.